You couldn't buy a machine, so the next best thing was to make one. I wasn't a particularly good mathematician, but I was good at art, and I took engineering from there. I can remember buying a crash helmet so that Dad could compete. The cheeky bugger took it back on the way home. When we finished the baby car, will I be able to drive it to school? And I swear if they cut you in half, you said VSCC across the middle of you, just like a stick of rock.
Welcome to Vintage Velocity, the podcast from the Vintage Sports Car Club. Today I'm here with Charles Knill-Jones at Tula Precision in the Cotswolds. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you very much.
That's good.
Thank you for coming all this way on such a dreadful day.
It was a bit wet up there.
It was just awful.
Anyway, we're here in the dry.
Yep.
I don't think we can hear the rain anymore. It might have stopped, but we are at Tula Precision, which is a workshop which you've moved into, I suppose, more recently. I mean, you've been here a while.
Probably 5.5 years, something like that, time just flies.
Time does fly, but I want to start right back.
When we first met.
When we first met, and you were looking after Nick Mason's cars at 10/10.
Yes.
And you were racing with Holly.
Sure.
But I want to start a bit before then.
Right.
Before I met you, how did you get into working with Nick? Where did all that come from?
Well, it was quite ironic. I applied to a very small advert in the back of Autosport, and it was a tiny advert. No picture, wanted technician for a historic racing team. And so I sent off my CV. I tried all sorts of F1 teams, and it was in the 90s recession. Nobody was taking on anybody, but Nick needed a gap to be filled, and I just so happened to be the right person at the right time to apply for the job. He wanted to introduce his daughters, both Holly and Chloe, into the historic racing scene and have somebody on the same sort of age group to relate their experiences across, rather than some silly old fart who I've now grown into. So I started work with Nick when I replied to a tiny advert in the back of Autosport. It came out weekly and was the current magazine when I was looking for a fresh start after leaving university. And sadly, the F1 market was dead to the water, partly because of the recession of the 90s. But Nick was still looking for somebody to help coordinate and introduce his daughters, both Holly and Chloe, into the motor racing scene of the historics. So yes, we went forward. I suppose I was in London, where the 10/10 offices were at the time, for about 6 months before I got shuffled into the country down to the Cotswolds of Cirencester to build a Bugatti for his wife, Annette Mason.
Wait. Where did you get this experience and knowing how to do this from?
Well, having grown up within a motoring circle, my dad's father, my grandfather, was one of Campbell's great mates at Brooklands, and used to go and just purvey and watch all his engineering fleeting introductions, and then my father introduced me because he was a member of the VSCC from the early 60s, if not before. So we had a Riley 9 when I was first born, which he competed at various different events. But my first event I went to with him was the Pomeroy Trophy. We had to buy, I can remember distinctly going into a motorcycle shop en route and buying a crash helmet so that Dad could compete. Anyway, the cheeky bugger took it back on the way home and said it doesn't fit, which was just hilarious. Either which way, that was my first introduction to it.
And you were infused with motoring and engineering since then?
Mum says particularly after my recent accident, she said, the last time I was in hospital with you, Charles, was when you were born. And I swear if they cut you in half, you said VSCC across the middle of you, just like a stick of rock, because the whole motoring ethos has been ingrained in my culture or
So
my
now
nature.
let's get back to, you were working with Holly and Chloe with Nick and supporting them and racing with them at 10/10.
Well, we started off very much with the pre-war Ulsters, which were such a good all-round vehicle for learning the craft of skillful driving and the engineering that goes into it. So in many ways, we were learning together. I was learning the engineering setup and the practicalities of preparing a racing car, and Holly and Chloe were both learning or perfecting their art, which they have very naturally, of the skills of piloting such a vehicle.
And with that, you looked after not only the Ulsters, but a Formula One March car.
We stepped up all the way through, right to the end, because of course Goodwood was at its virginal status in terms of the Festival of Speed. The revival hadn't yet been started.
Yeah.
There was much talk for a good 3 or 4 years of the potential of all it transferring from the festival to the revival. But with the with the festival in its primitive primary years, the general makeup of the event was very much penciled in from what was Nick's database of owners and historic Grand Prix Car Association members, that Goodwood used as a bit of a template for who to approach and when, with whom and what cars.
And what cars, yeah.
So yes, Nick did know about the March 86C, which was probably the last DFV engine powered, or DFX engine I should say, powered Indy car that ran at Indianapolis, but it was certainly the first Adrian Newey car that he ever designed, and we took that to the Festival of Speed at least 3 or 4 times. Yes, so that was towards the late 90s, early 2000s.
And that's where I met you.
Yeah.
That's when I met you. And so the other cars that you've worked on with Nick, a Delage?
No, we never had a Delage. We
What
had
did you have?
from the very early days, in the pioneering times, was the Panhard Lavassa, which was quite an incredible car of 1901. It was a Grand Prix. Well, it was a racer rather than. They made 2 types of B1 Panhard, and ours had come from the Wingrove collection in America. Nick had it for some years. Tony Merrick had recommissioned the car for Nick, but it had all sorts of things like roller bearing hubs on the front end, bigger atmospheric valves than the road car. It had 2 sorts of different ignition or sparking devices. It had a tremble coils as well as hot plug ignition. It also had sequential gearboxes and all sorts of wonderful features. So it was very cutting edge at the time, in the pioneering times.
Sequential gearboxes for that time.
Yeah, just amazing. But the tremble coil thing is something that the BMW went back to in the 80s and is still on modern cars now, where each individual cylinder has 1 coil, and the distributor distributes the low tension circuit rather than the high tension circuit. Quite incredible.
Yeah, I'm trying to work all that out in my little engineering brain here. Also, Nick's obviously known for his Ferrari.
Ferraris.
Ferraris, but
Plural.
I'm thinking of the 250 short wheelbase that...
No, we've never had a 250 short.
I'm getting all
Nick
the cars wrong.
Has never had a 250 short wheelbase.
My producer's going to get very angry with me because I get all the cars wrong.
Yes, we had a 250. It was a GTO. It's probably the most famous car in the world, and it's one of those just amazing road racers, designed for the long distance Le Mans 24 hours, but a very tractable car. And the connection between Holly and Nick goes back to school days when he used to pick her up from school in it, and we then pushed it all the way as far as we could in terms of its racing capabilities, up until about 10 years ago. I think it probably raced every year of its life since 1962.
And then it sat in the Victoria and Albert Museum.
It did.
During his exhibition.
Yes, which was quite incredible. I think it might have gone back for the Norman Foster exhibition too.
The design
exhibition.
At the design centre?
No, I can't remember where it was.
Yeah.
It was after I'd left, sadly.
Oh. So, but you started working on Bugattis, didn't you?
As a result of working on Nick's two cars,
Yeah.
I was sent up to Richard I. Anson at Tula Engineering to put together, or finish putting together, a car that Richard had started for Nick's wife, Annette Mason. And it was a car that took the best part of a year and a half to complete. And I worked with Michael Whiting, who now works for me, all those years later. Michael's been with us since, or with Tula Engineering and Tula Precision, since 1971, I believe, which is quite incredible. Yeah, so he's time served. What he knows or what he has forgotten, we still don't know.
Got space. So is that where your love for Bugatti started?
There's a correlation with Bugatti and their family, which sort of balances with my brain and upbringing. Bugatti is very much linked between a conflict of interest between art and design, which I found myself in through engineering and through what I was good at school. I wasn't a particularly good mathematician, but I was good at art and design, and I took engineering pathway from there. So I have a sort of similar appreciation for Bugatti's conflict of interest.
And you have, throughout the years now, and I was walking around the workshop earlier, you've got almost every model of your little miniature cars.
Yes, we've got a lot of Bugatti toy cars of the smaller scale, some of which are toys from my youth, some of which I've collected over the years, some of which I got gifted. But yes, they're an interesting one of each mark, or not mark, one of each model of the Bugatti mark.
Yeah. And I saw some Scalextric cars as well.
There are. The most recent acquisition was one of each of the rework of the Type 59 Scalextric car, which was the most valuable model of the Scalextric equip, as it were, because I think they only made 10 originally in the 1960s or 50s, and they became very sought after because the car really is quite the most amazing piece.
And another humorous note, I saw you had a pasta making steering wheel.
Well, not so much steering wheel, but a pasta making machine, a replica of the original that Bugatti had made, and he'd gone into the stores of his workshop and he picked various different pieces together, the bevel gears from a differential and a steering wheel to make the actuation of the plunger, because it is an extruding machine, to extrude the pasta through a former, which
makes it like a sponge.
absolutely. There was only one ever made by the factory, but I think there have been several recreations made, and we've got one, or I think we might even have two, which is irony, a bit greedy for some.
So that's in the sense of the design and the art and a bit of the humour. But I want to go back to the engineering concept of Ettore, and you can, because you've worked on so many of the marks and his whole sort of catalogue of different
Not
cars.
quite the whole catalogue.
But I was just looking. You've worked on quite a few.
We have.
Quite a
The four-wheel
few.
drive is a missing item. The later 57G tank cars is a missing item within the equip or the skill set. But right the way from the early Brescias, 8 valves, through to the later 57Ss, which got...
That's what I mean. You've worked on quite a few of the varieties. Can you see? Do you see? Are you getting into his brain? Are you getting into his brain? How his development happens?
You can definitely see a pathway. Because of his engineering thoughts, which he formed through probably cogitation and drafting, sketching his design principles. He found himself in several compromising situations where, how do I actually make the thing? And there have been many good tutorials, like the Ivan Dutton tutorial on how they forged or recreated the forging of the hollow front axle beam from a GP car, through to how they made their banana tappets for the Brescias, to avoid the principle of a pivoting rocker within the cam box area. So the actual manufacturing had to be translated quite often from Ettore's design principles. It's been quite an interesting pathway. There's quite often, why on earth did he do it this way, or the fact that you have to take a whole car to pieces to get an engine out, which is the irony of life. There are no shortcuts with Bugatti engineering, so you have to just abide by the time-served principles.
And also everything that Bugatti designed and made is a piece of jewellery in itself.
It is, and I think a lot of that stems from his design principles rather than the practicalities, which very much got short-circuited in the 1970s within British motor industry. They could make things so practically that the design itself had lost its kudos, as it were.
I mean, just thinking of the shape of the 1970s, that's square.
Yeah.
It's just so square.
But everything Bugatti and vintage is much more elegant, streamlined, or has a degree of fluidity to it.
Do you think, from working on his cars and working inside his brain, which I think you are kind of working, you're always working in there, do you think his ambition of speed was to make speed as elegant as possible? Because it was stationary, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But then when you see the car move, it's even more beautiful.
I don't know whether it was such an important the link between that and speed. I think by the time Bugatti Ettore had got towards the 30s, he was towards the tail end of his professional career, and his son had very much taken over the business. But his designs were still coming forwards. But I think the correlation between his artistic brain and his engineering brain has always been there as a driving force for his designs, and I think that is really the key to the pennings that he put together.
And what car are we sitting beside here today?
We're sitting beside, it may have got mentioned earlier, we're sitting beside a Type 59, probably from the period which is most iconic, with the transition between Ettore's design concept and his son, which was taking a transition of taking over the racing department, as it were. So the Type 59 was a bit of a design misnomer. It wasn't as successful as it probably could or should have been, but probably the most beautiful Grand Prix car, I think, that was ever made, and certainly a very practical and quite a delightful road car to drive, even though its practicalities are slightly tainted by the fact that you can't carry anything much more than what you can fit in your pockets.
And balance on a little bridge of a suitcase.
People have tried to bring them into a more usable, practical device. Certainly, people have fitted road wings and windscreens to them, but that's thankfully as far as they go, because the rest of the bodywork and the engineering behind it are just so beautiful.
And let's talk a little bit about the engineering and the makeup of some of the components. Now you're restoring this car that we're sitting beside, and I can see it's got beautiful leatherwork. I mean, stunning leatherwork. You make a lot, well, most of all of the parts here that need to be made.
Well, we've made the whole car, in actual fact, because it is a recreation, a new car that I started for myself about 15 years ago. And I think when I was 40, all of my friends corralled together or got together, hoping to bring the chassis, which was 2 or 3 years overdue in manufacture, into the hangar which I was working in, as my birthday present.
Oh my!
Which would have been quite something. Sadly, the car or the chassis didn't quite get finished in time, but we have made every single component. Not necessarily here. The bodywork was done by Shapecraft. The chassis was done by Gino Hoskins. Tom Dark, who is another VSCC member and creator, and certainly one of my early friends that we've grown up together. He did the wheels, and yes, we've gone from there and put the car together. And I sold it only so that I could raise some capital to buy the house which I'm now living in with my darling family.
So this is a great honour to be sitting beside this car. I can see a starting handle in the leather wallet pouch inside.
Yes.
It's on the side. Is the Type 59
It does. It goes in
on the
through
side?
the side, through a little bevel gear, in through the rear engine bearer.
Why does it go in the side and not at the front like the other ones?
There is no room because of the drop front axle for it to go in and start onto the front of the crankshaft. I think also at the time, although the starting handle was used by many of the mechanics, I think it was primarily used during setup and race preparation to get the timing of the cams and the plugs and the spark coordinator. I don't believe it was ever started on the handle, or primarily started on the handle at meetings. I think it was an emergency get out of jail clause, and I think they might have produced an electric starter motor that went in through the same side hole in period. Yes.
In period. And one or two final other parts let's talk about. We've got a leather sheath over the
gaiter.
Gaiter.
Yeah, just to contain the spark plugs. But one of the finest pieces on a Type 59 or visually is the link between the two barrels of the carburettor, which is a gear or quadrant put together, which joins the two barrels together, so that when you actuate the throttle, the two are coordinated, and there aren't many cars that have such a beautiful throttle mechanism. Bugatti could have made a link with rods or cables, but chose to really amplify his engineering prowess with that particular piece.
That's stunning. It is really stunning. The whole. So the body was recreated with these
Louvers.
The louvers.
To let the air in and out.
I mean, what fascinates me is I was talking to some friends who've got their children doing their GCSE selections, and there's no metalwork or woodwork on there, like none. And I just think, how does this how do we continue this manufacturing, engineering?
It's the age-old problem that has been highlighted certainly within the last probably 10 years as a result of an industry that's sort of on its shadows, looking back at some of the heydays of it all. I didn't take a toolmaker's course. I would love to have done, but we did have a metalworking and an engineering department as well as a woodworking department at my school, and I think there probably is a department still at my old school, Eastbourne Colleges, but fundamentally there are some apprenticeship schemes that take on young engineers who've got a good skill set. The irony, of course, is that there are many youthful children who have got many practical skills that they're able to transfer into, particularly those that are autistic or have learning difficulties, who are very good at Lego, who've grown up with Lego, Meccano, and all of those basic hands-on communication tools.
Which need a lot of time and dedication and concentration.
And sadly, the engineering departments, the metalwork, the woodwork, aren't at schools nowadays or able to nurture some of those children into that skill set. I mean, there's no shadow of a doubt that you have to have a particular mindset or framework to really have the skill to do some of these.
To have the concept of making that now.
Yeah.
I mean, I've still got my screwdriver, my metal screwdriver that I made, and at school, and all of my wooden boxes that I made, and without that, I just wouldn't know. I just love that whole foundation of,
that's where the apprenticeship schemes, which I think Bicester Heritage are pushing forward, for example, are so important to marry some of the skill sets, not to stop them from dying out, but to marry some of the skill sets that these children who aren't pure educational skill set needs, that those needs of hands-on practical
Can be
skills can
utilised.
be utilised
Yeah.
and nurtured.
It's a great thing they've got at
Yeah.
Vista Heritage.
Well,
And
it's if not they'll have to just push down the arts and crafts side, and learn techniques like printmaking and
welding.
welding. Yes.
Going back to Mr. Bugatti and your passion and love for them, have you felt like you've moulded into? I've asked this a minute ago about getting into his brain, but what's one of your most, apart from this car that we're sitting next to, which is obviously beautiful, but have you got any cars that you just think, gosh, I'm feeling what he was up to?
Sort of. I mean, I'm my own man, and we are worlds apart in terms of how the world stands from when Ettore grew up in the 1890s to 1920s. I can't even begin to transfer myself back in time that far, but certainly the engineering qualities that he pushed forwards, I'm enjoying. I'm using some of my time and rehabilitation post-accident to try and translate some of my knowledge and skill set to my next generation, my son Angus. So we come in on Saturday mornings and we share some time in the workshop together, and that stems from basic principles of communication. After my accident where I had my brain injury, learning how to communicate was a difficult task. So I use Lego and the manuals and learning an instruction with a toddler who was 5 or 6 at the time, and teaching him how to follow instructions, but also the engineering that went into the piece that we were making, whether it was a suspension beam on the car or the aerodynamic bodywork. And then we took it one step further, and I started building remote control models together with Tamiya models, and then into the more modern TRX models, which were four-wheel drive rock climbers, and using that bridge of showing how you can communicate your engineering path with the next generation, but also some of the practical elements of it. So we spent, I took some time to ask him what his favourite car in his Tonka Toy collection was, and he really loved, absolutely loved the Bigfoot four-wheel drive car.
Yeah.
And we came in together on Saturday mornings and made a Bigfoot model out of steel.
What does it look like, the Bigfoot car?
It's your archetypal large tyres pickup, two-seater pickup truck from the 70s, 80s American field. But I used a box section and cut it all down, and I taught him some principles of hacksawing and filing and brazing it all together, and introduced him at the age of 5 or 6 to lathes and the mills, and spray painting and bead blasting and just general materials preps. I mean, I did it from a distance. He was sat there with his headphones on and his safety glasses while I coordinated the various different tools and machines. But he understood very much where the dangers were and the practicalities of it all. We made time as a father and son to entertain their exercises, and I used it very much as the rehabilitation in my brain and to try and bridge some of those gaps that were missing.
But also for Angus, I saw him racing at the Setrington race at Goodwood. So
Very lucky boy.
So he's seen the result, or what can be, from making a car, from
the hard work that goes into it.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got me as a father. His grandfather, Lionel Rogers, is a pure engineer from New Zealand. Lionel in the 70s had to make, because he couldn't buy an injection moulding machine anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere, he made his own injection moulding machine and built it into his home. He had the machine in his bedroom and the hopper in his downstairs living room, or vice versa, I believe, actually, remembering. I think the machine was upstairs in his living room, and the hopper was in his bedroom. So when the hopper was full, it used to overspill and wake him up into his bed, so that he could then go upstairs and refill the injection moulding machine. But that was in the 70s, when there was a trade embargo, because New Zealand wasn't party to the whole European connection, so you couldn't buy a machine, so the next best thing was to make one.
So it made a change in the 70s from a waterbed.
Absolutely, although Lionel did go on to buy a waterbed, which, yes, I think his son is still enjoying floating around in his home in New Zealand. Yes.
So his grandson, your son, has also now been infused with
the engineering
mould, which is it's beautiful, isn't it?
Well, it's great. We're currently we've been building children's cars since the late 70s. Well, partly because I bought a project that Richard Ianson had started for William Ianson, his son, which was a petrol engine Type 52-esque model, a silhouette of the Type 35, but we've taken it one step further, because we'd like to link in the engineering that Angus and I have learned together into a more practical aspect. So we are building an electric Type 59 children's car directly for Angus to use.
And is that, so we have a Type 59 next to us.
Yes.
And you're building the Type 59, like for like, in the scale, small scale?
Very close. I can't remember what the scale is, 1.335 to 1. Ironically, it was all based around us trying to find a tyre that was
So you started with
correct,
the tyre first?
because that was something that we needed to get right. We needed to find a tyre that could fit both in scale, front and rear, the front being slightly smaller than the rear, which is the way the Grand Prix cars were in their day, but it also had to have a similar tread pattern to a vintage tyre at the time. So we started with that and then scaled up from there.
Wow.
Thankfully, Angus is still able to fit in it. It's taken us longer to complete the project, partly because of my accident. It delayed it a good 2 years for me to get up enough strength to communicate to him what I wanted to achieve with his help.
How long is
to coordinate it.
So he's 6.
We started
he's
it.
5,
We
6.
started it when he was probably 4, maybe 3.5, 4, and he's 7 now.
And how tall is he?
Well, that's a good question.
I mean,
he's tall enough to fit into it. We've had Louis sat in it, and Emily, who runs our parts department, she can still fit in it. But even the petrol engine cars from the 70s, and 70s and 80s and 90s, which we've made, I hope to be able to drive it with my leg in the car, or one of the legs in the car.
What,
and
the
second
children's
leg,
car?
Yes, the children's
Okay,
car.
okay.
And the second leg resting on the exhaust manifold.
So he can drive it. That's good. Oh, good. I was just thinking.
But
Oh my God.
I do know that Angus has got some of the engineering. When we made and fitted the beautiful Type 59 oil cooler, which sits on the side of the chassis, he turned round to me and he stood back. He said, "Daddy, that looks good." But he said, "Why have I got an oil cooler and yet we've got an electric engine?" He knew that an oil cooler was needed on a petrol engine. He knew he'd got an electric engine. So why would we need one? But it had to be on there for design.
The aesthetics.
And for it to look right. It couldn't be a Type 59 without an oil cooler on
So-
the side of the chassis.
That's absolutely. The next point is you're making an electric car.
How do you stop him from turning left or right out of the drive and driving it to school? Which was his next question to me last Tuesday night at 7 o'clock when I said goodnight to him on the video call. I said, "Have you got any other questions after a busy day today?" And he said, "Yes, Daddy, when we finish the baby car, will I be able to drive it to school?"
Oh my.
And I thought, oh my goodness, no, Angus, it won't be sadly legal to drive on the road. So we've now got to think about how to produce a boundary to stop him, age 7, driving it all the way down the highways to school.
Oh my goodness! That wasn't really my question, but that's a good one from Angus. But my question is, you wanting it to make you need to make it aesthetically correct to a petrol engine, and you're having it as an electric car. Is there? I'm looking behind you a little bit because the car is sitting behind your head.
Yes, we're still in the prototyping stage, getting. We do have a forward drive at the moment. We've got a neutral gear as well, but we're looking for the reverse gear at the moment, and then we've got to final fix the pedals.
So it will look like a petrol engine, just
From the outside.
From the outside,
yes.
yeah.
I mean, it should look like a scaled down replica of the exact.
I mean, looking at the details beside me here, everything is just so finely tuned with the copper wire that goes
The
around.
only thing that I haven't incorporated on the model is the body screws, and partly because which are copper wire together. On the model, I just thought it would be too dangerous because they are a bit sharp and could be caught on either a piece of clothing or a twig or something, and just be another piece that you had to worry about.
So where is Angus going to be able to drive his car?
Well, in the backyard, probably around the paddock, not at our paddock, a paddock at a race meeting or wherever it might be.
Do you think the A35 Setrington race might be able to accommodate some Bugatti races?
That's the J40 race.
The J40 race.
Do you think
do you think they'll be able to accommodate some Bugatti?
I don't think so. It is very much a one-off for Angus. It's an electric car, and the Setrington Cup is very much for the pedal cars that were made in the 50s all the way through to I think the 70s.
It'd be such a dream though to see little Bugattis racing along.
Well,
couldn't they do that at the festival or something? Couldn't we ask?
Who knows?
Couldn't we ask? It's like, can you do some Bugatti, little mini Bugatti?
Well, we'll see.
Anyway, finally we have to wrap up. We've been talking for ages, which is great.
Good.
You manufacture parts here, which you sell.
We do.
What are some of the parts that you sell?
We've tried to support as much of the Bugatti industry as possible over the last 60 years, since Tula's been been operating. Sadly, Brinnerton Engineering closed its doors to the public about 3 or 4 years ago, and they were a key supplier for us in the supply chain network of sports. So I've taken on their product line, and we have all of their technical drawings, their patterns, and their coordinations, but also their manufacturing principles, and a lot of their tooling, so we can at least bridge that gap. Primarily, I wanted to try and support my client network. It wasn't about changing the world. It was about trying to keep the cars on the road that need to be kept on the road, and for the various different activities, whether it's racing, or the rallies, or the hill climbs, or the trials. Tommy Waterfield has very much taken over the racing department. My racing days are sadly over. I've spent enough time in the paddock at various different tracks and on the pit wall, but I do think there is some good practical advice that I can at least share with Tommy and the racing clientele. But we shall concentrate at Tula Precision with the engineering whys and wherefores of the road cars.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for having me in your workshop here. It's just beautiful, and I might have to, well, I won't tea leaf one. I'll purchase a chopping board, a Bugatti chopping board from your windowsill upstairs.
Well, for your
or a butter plate, butter
for the next
chopping.
time you get a motoring friend come over, you can impress them with a cheese board and maybe a butter board.
Yeah.
Either which way, they're just a fun thing to have about. There weren't something that Bugatti designed, but what we've done is taken the various different radiator shapes and scaled them down onto a more practical bamboo element with the nice logoing on the top. It's very much a Christmas present or a birthday present, just for a fun motoring fact, not to try and change the world.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed our chat with Charles Knill-Jones from Tula Precision, and join us next time where we'll talk to somebody else. Thank you.